Hello and welcome to part 4 in our action RPG series. In this series we are now going to be starting to take a look at our ability system. Now this is going to be a multi-part bit because there's quite a lot to do with the ability system. So in this episode we're going to set up the starting points of our abilities and their effects and talk a bit more about how we set them up and how and where we put different properties such as name, resources and so on. Now a big part of this will be the stats component which we add to the player character, and this will keep track of our various stats the player will have, including things like health. So let's get started. Okay, so what we're going to do is, with our stats, is create a stats component, and that's going to control and contain all the various stats our player will have, as well as any modifiers that we do to those stats. So we're going to go into our abilities. No, we won't put in abilities. We'll put in the systems folder here, and we'll make a new blueprint class, and we'll choose actor component, and we'll call this one stats component. Open this up, and in here we're going to have a variety of stats associated to our character. Now the main thing we want on this is going to be a map, so go to variables and we're going to do stats, and that'll be a string. This will indicate the name of the stat: health, mana, dexterity, intelligence, so on. And we're going to make it a map with a float. Okay, so we can increase and store information about each of these stats. So let's compile that, and then in our default values we can insert some of the key ones we need. So we're going to do health, strength, dexterity, intelligence, willpower, and that'll do for now. So health, strength, dexterity, intelligence, willpower. Now I haven't put mana or strength or stamina or anything like that in there, because that would be a separate value that we are maintaining at all time. And it's not in particular, it'll be changed. So we're not going to have mana and stamina on here, we're just going to have resource. And that resource would be true for all our characters. So resource. Okay, we'll put some default values in here. So health will start at 100. Strength 25, dexterity 25, intelligence we'll do 10, willpower do 10, resource do 100. Okay, there's our various stats for this. So when we are taking damage, for example, we need to affect the health of our character. So what we can actually do on here is actually bind an event to our owner of this to when I take damage. So we can go on begin play, get owner. This will return whoever owns this component. I'm going to drag it from there and do bind event on damage, and I'm going to choose take any damage. Plug that in there. The event we'll drag down into a custom event, and we'll do on damaged. As you can see, it's going to bring over all the various things we need to know about when we take damage. So the main thing is I want to deplete the stat for health. Now, rather than doing it all manually, I'm going to make a function that makes this life a little bit easier. So in functions, we're going to create a new function, and we'll do effect. We'll do alter stat, we'll call it. There you go. And we need an input for a string, which indicates which stat we're changing. So stat. And the change will be right here. So change, that'll be a float. And on alter stat here, we're going to drag out our stats. I'm going to find in our map this stat here. This returns the value of its currently set in the map, as well as if it was true or not, whether it found it. We can use this boolean to error out any issues with this, in case we do have weird typos later on. So I'm going to put it in here. And on the false, if it doesn't find a stat, we'll just do a simple print string saying something like error, no invalid stat with that name. Okay. And then on true, I'm going to take my stat and do add. Now the add node doesn't just add the value on, it replaces it. So we're going to take this found value and we're going to add on the change onto it. Then that will go through into there. The stat name, we can either drag a line straight from there, or we can just search for stat. It's exactly the same as dragging a line from there to there. So true will go into there, and then we'll do a return node. And I want the return node to return whether the stat has been depleted. So that would be a boolean. Which one? Stat depleted. We also want to do on here the new current value of the stat. So current value, and that'll be a float. So when this is added onto here, the current value will be the stat here. We're going to do find this stat and pull that into there. Now I can't just drag from this plus here, because what it'll do is it'll go back and then find the new value, add on the change, and it will increase it even more so, which we don't want. We just want to get this current value as it is at this moment in time. And stat depleted, we can work that out if the found value here is less than or equal to 0, and that will go into there. And yeah, there we go. So we've got a function called AutoStat. So if I go back to my event graph, and when I take damage, I can drag out my AutoStat function, and the damage will go into the change. And actually, damage is going to come through as a positive number. We're adding it onto our stat. So for health, we want to take it away. So damage here, we're going to multiply by -1 first. There you go. And we're going to type in name health, like that. Okay. Compile and save that. So what we'll do now is go add this onto my player character. Go into his thing here, and on the add here, we're going to add the stat component. Now, if you want to change any of the stats per character, so let's say you have different characters like wizards, barbarians, and so on, you can change the stats over here on the details panel by just expanding it open and changing their default stats. Okay. Now let's go back to our stats component and look at what else we can do to this, because this would be quite useful for the whole entire game, really. There's quite a few things we could use for it. Like for one, for example, we can keep track of the player's current level. So player level, and that'd be integer. And again, we make functions to affect this. So function over here, we'll call level up. And quite simply, what we're going to do is player level, and we're going to plus 1 set to player level. But before we do that, we want to clamp this value. So clamp that integer there between 1 and 50. Okay, so 50 would be the maximum level we can level up to. Okay, so level up does that and changes the player level. Simple. I may want to query a stat as well. So we've got auto stat. Maybe we want to query one. This will be useful for when doing UI things. So on the functions here, we're going to do query stat. This will want to know what stat we want to query. And on outputs, we're going to have the value in there. And this was a very simple one, because all you're going to do is you're going to drag out your stats map, do find, and plug in a stat there, and that into there. Query stat. Done. So we've got altering stat, leveling up, and querying stat. We need XP as well on here, so we're going to have XP. And that would be an integer. And we also want XP max. That will also be an integer. So that'd be like the maximum that we need to level up. And XP is the current XP. Okay. So let's take a look at how abilities will work. So abilities are going to come in mostly two different actors. We've got ability themselves and we've got ability effects. And the ability effects are most of the ones that are doing the actual legwork. They're doing the damage, they're buffing, debuffing, all those sort of things. The ability is there to sort of manage it. So they will determine whether or not the ability can be cast, whether something needs to happen first, and also whether or not the ability is on cooldown. So all that will be handled by these two different classes. So I'm going to close my stat for now and go back to my content drawer and go into abilities, and we're going to create these two things. So go to blueprint class, actor, and we'll call this one ability, and make another one called ability effect. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a child of my ability. If I right click in and doing create child blueprint, and I would name this one ability slash. Okay, so our greystone character will slash their sword. That's what it's going to be using for. So I've got ability slash, and I've got in here a effect. Ability, let me name it properly. Ability effect slash. Okay, so we've got those setups going on here, and it might be a good idea to separate the two so you don't get too lost. So we do abilities, another one for effects. Okay, and we'll just chuck those in there. Okay, so let's go through the ability parent class and talk about some of the things that we will need on this. So first of all, abilities need to know the resource that it's going to cost, who is doing the casting, and if there's an intended target. Some spells you may want to be intended targets, some are just in the area. But first of all, let's worry about the actual abilities cost. So on the variables here, we're going to have cost. And this is going to refer to a float. Okay. In fact, I'll just we'll do cost value. We'll change that to. Okay, so cost value is how much is this going to cost. We also want to know the cost stat. Okay, so what are we using here? And this is useful in case you have multiple things like resources that you want in your character. Maybe you also want them to like take away their health if they use the ability, whatever it may be. This allows for any stat to be up for grabs basically when this thing gets spawned in. So those are the two things. We also need to know what effect the abilities will have. Now, abilities could also have multiple effects. So for example, you could do an explosion, which will do the effect of the explosion and dealing damage, but it'll have another effect where it leaves a pool of fire on the floor, which can do more damage over time. So it can have multiple. So what we're going to do on the variables here is we're going to have effects and change the type here to effect, and you'll see gameplay effect in the list. Where are we? Let me just redo that. Ability effect, gameplay effect, ability effect. There we go. And oh, sorry, it has to be classes. Ability effect, and you want to choose a class reference and make that an array. Okay. Now there's other information that you'll need as well that you may not have thought of. First of all, you need their name, description, thumbnail, ranks, all those sort of things that we need to know about each of these abilities. Now, in here, I'm going to put in name, and that'll be the text value, and it'll be a single variable, a description, and that'll be text again, a thumbnail, and that'll be a texture 2D, and it goes in there. We want cooldown, and that'll be a float. And the cooldown, basically what happens is when we spawn this ability in, we're going to save the ability reference, and then it'll die eventually with its cooldown, and whilst it's still alive it can't be cast again. Okay, so that's hence why you get this cooldown effect. Okay, and there are our variables. Now, there may be some more that we put in later on, but these are the core ones we need. We need to know the name, description, thumbnail, cooldown, costs, and effects that it's going to have. If you want to do cast time, for example, you can do, but in actual RPG, we don't typically have a cast time, but obviously you're more than welcome to add them onto here. So we're going to save that and close that. And if I go to that slash ability that I made, first of all, I can go back in here, and on the right hand side, I can put all this information. Now, being a bit OCD, we probably want to organize this a little bit better, so it's not just in default category and in a hodgepodge sort of manner. So I'm going to go back to my ability, and we're going to categorize our things here. So name, we'll do ability details, we'll call this one. And so that'd be name, and I can now just drag these up to our variables for ability details. So name, description, thumbnail, cooldown, cost stat, cost value, and effects. Okay, we'll just put that down here, just reorganize this a little bit. So cost stat, cost value, cooldown, effects. I'll put effects down at the bottom. Come on. There we go. So name, description, thumbnail, stat, value, cooldown, and effects. Cool. Now, all abilities will have some common events and functions in them. So the first one will have a custom event called activate ability. Okay. Then we're going to have a function saying can activate ability. And the purpose of this function is to check the stat and cost whether we have it or not. If we don't carry on. Now with this can activate ability, I want to make this a pure function, because all I need to do in here is check our stat and value against our player character. And what we're going to do in here is get owner of this ability. And from there, I'm going to get component by class. And I'm going to choose our stat component. There we are. And now I can query a stat. Okay, so I can do query stat, plug that into can activate ability, stat here, we can put in the stat value. And the value here, I could check if this is greater than or equal to our cost value. And this is just going to be outputting on a return node a boolean, simply enough. So put that in there and plug that into there. Now if I go back to my event graph, when I go to activate ability, I can now call the can activate ability and put that into a branch. So now we can do true to actually activate the ability. And when we're activating the ability, we are essentially grabbing all the effects and spawning them all in. Okay. Now, one thing we want to know about the ability is maybe an intended target and who is casting it. So on the variables, we're going to add in caster and make that a character reference. And we're going to have a intended target, which also could be a character reference. Okay, and I'm going to rename these ones to targeting category. So let's targeting, just in case we want to keep it a bit more organized, like that. Okay, so on activate ability, we're going to spawn in all the effects. We're going to drag in our effects. From there, we do a for each. And then from that, we can spawn actor from class. Okay, and now go through spawning each of the actors. We still need to give it a spawn transform. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag out my caster and my intended target. And I want to spawn it on the location of whoever is intended here. So if it's the intended target's been set something, I want to set it onto that. So if I'm debuffing something in particular because I've chosen it, or if otherwise I'm just going to spawn it on my character. So we're going to take the intended target here and do is valid. I'm using this one to get the Boolean value. And we're going to take the spawn transform from our spawn actor. And we do select transform. And the Boolean is going to go into our pick A. Now, if it's A and it does have an intended target, we want to get the intended target's transform. Get actor transform. If it's not true, it's going to pick B, and that'll be the caster's actor transform. So get actor transform. And put that in there. Okay, and now we'll spawn in the effect. And there you go. We've now got the start of our ability system underway. In the next episode, we're going to continue this further and developing our ability system and its various effects so we can cast a simple attack spell. You can watch the next episode right now over on patreon.com/Ryan Laley, where you can find all my videos early from just $1 a month. Thank you to all my patrons and YouTube members for the continued support. Make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.